Hello grade 6 and welcome to a new lesson in social studies. So this week's lesson is going to be lesson 2 of chapter 1 and the title of this lesson is How Does a Historian Work? Our learning objectives are analyze what makes a source reliable and to categorize by primary or secondary source. So first of all, let's unlock the vocabulary words that we will be using in this lesson. So let's match the words with their meaning. Evidence, and it's something that shows a proof that something is true. And source is a document or reference work, while the primary source is a first-hand evidence of an event in history. Secondary source is a document or written work created after an event. Point of view is a personal attitude about people or life. And finally, we have bias, and it's unreasoned emotional judgment about people and events. So let's start our lesson. First of all, I need you to know that historians ask questions about the information they find from the past. For example, they would ask, why did some nations go to war? How were the people affected by the war? And how did events of the past change people's lives? These questions help us focus on historical problems. So to learn the answers to the historical questions, historians look for evidence. As we discussed earlier, evidence is something that shows proof or an indication that something is true. Evidence could be in the form of a material object such as soldiers' uniform or scraps of pottery from an archaeological dig. Other evidence may appear in documents or written materials that were created during a historical event. Historians use the evidence they read in historical sources to interpret what happened in the past. So now let's look what are primary and secondary sources. So historians look for clues about the past in primary and secondary sources. Primary sources are first-hand pieces of evidence. They were written or created by the people who saw or experienced an event. Primary sources include letters, diaries, or government records. Literature or artwork from a particular time and place is a primary source. Spoken interviews and objects such as tools or clothes are also primary sources. Primary sources help historians learn what people were thinking while the events took place. They use the source to find evidence that explains historical events. Historians also use secondary sources. Secondary sources, as we discussed earlier, are created after an event. They are created by people who were not part of the historical event. The information in secondary sources is often based on primary sources. Examples of secondary sources are biographies, encyclopedias, history books, and textbooks. A secondary source contains background information, and secondary sources also offer a broad view of an event. However, a historian must use primary sources to find new evidence about a subject. So now let's see what is a point of view. Historians interpret the document and the reasons it was created. Then they form an opinion about whether the source is trustworthy and reliable in its facts. This step is important or crucial since each source was written with a particular point of view or general attitude about people or life. The authors of primary sources use their points of view to decide what information is important and what to include in the document. So that's why historians evaluate a primary source to find its point of view. They decide if it has a trustworthy point of view. Sometimes a point of view is expressed as a bias or unreasoned emotional judgment about people and events. Sources with a bias cannot always be trusted. So now, let me show you how to write about history. So when historians write about an event, they interpret the information from primary sources to draw conclusions and make inferences. Making an inference means choosing the most likely explanation for the facts at hand. Sometimes the inference is simple. For example, if you see a person who is wearing a raincoat walk into a room with a dripping umbrella, you can infer that it is raining outside. The dripping umbrella and the raincoat are the evidence that combine with your prior knowledge about whether to infer that it is raining. So making inferences about historical events is more complex. Historians check the evidence in primary sources and compare it to sources already known to be trustworthy. Then they look at secondary sources that express different points of view about an event. In this way, historians try to get a clear, well-rounded view of what happened. The inference they make is how they explain what happened in the past. This explanation is based on the evidence in primary and secondary sources. So to sum up today's lesson, I would like you to answer this question. Are primary or secondary sources more likely to contain bias? Please answer to this question, and thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next lesson.